Even now, my voice is reaching millions throughout the world. Millions of despairing men, women, and little children. Victims of a system that makes men torture and imprison innocent people. To those who can hear me, I say, do not despair. The misery that is now upon us is but the passing of greed, the bitterness of men who fear the way of human progress. The hate of men will pass, and dictators die, and the power they took from the people will return to the people. And so long as men die, liberty will never perish. Don't give yourselves to these unnatural men with machine minds and machine hearts. You are not machines. You are not cattle. You are men. You have the love of humanity in your hearts. You don't hate. Only the unloved hate. The unloved and the unnatural.
Hello, my name is Michael, and I obsess. I come across something that grabs me and I consume until I can't take anymore, and then I'm on to the next. Some obsessions last a week, others a lifetime. It is my intention to explore these obsessions with you as they occur while the passion is hot. Welcome to Eclectic Obsessions. I first became aware of Charlie Chaplin at a very young age. They were playing a block of his shorts during the local PBS telethon in the mid-70s, and I stayed up late to watch. I was already familiar with the Little Rascals and the Three Stooges, but this was different, more refined. I became an instant and lifelong fan. Decades later, I saw a documentary that opened my eyes to history I was unaware of. We will be exploring the Tramp and the Dictator on this episode of Eclectic Obsessions. The 2002 TCM original documentary, The Tramp and the Dictator, co-directed by Kevin Brownlow and Michael Kloft and narrated by Kenneth Branagh, compares the parallel lives of Charlie Chaplin and Adolf Hitler. Born within 4 days of each other in April 1889, Chaplin and Hitler became, respectively, the most loved and most hated men of their time. The two lives intersected when Chaplin made The Great Dictator in 1940, a satire of Hitler and his Nazi empire. The Tramp, also known as the Little Tramp, was British actor Charlie Chaplin's most memorable on-screen character and an icon in world cinema during the era of silent film. The Tramp is a childlike, bumbling, but generally good-hearted character who is most famously portrayed as a vagrant who endeavors to behave with the manners and dignity of a gentleman despite his actual social status. While he is ready to take what paying work is available, he also uses his cunning to get what he needs to survive and escape the authority figures who will not tolerate his antics. Chaplin's films did not always portray the Tramp as a vagrant, however. The character, the little fellow, as Chaplin called him, was rarely referred to by names on screen, although he was sometimes identified as Charlie, and rarely, as in the original silent version of The Gold Rush, the little funny Tramp. The character was originally created by accident while Chaplin was working at Mack Sennett's Keystone Studios, when dressing up for the short film Mabel's Strange Predicament starring Mabel Normand and Chaplin. In a 1933 interview, Chaplin explained how he came up with the look of the Tramp. A hotel set was built and I was hurriedly told to put on funny makeup. This time I went to the wardrobe and got a pair of baggy pants, a tight coat, a small derby hat, and a large pair of shoes. I wanted the clothes to be a mass of contradictions, knowing pictorially the figure would be vividly outlined on the screen. To add a comic touch, I wore a small mustache which would not hide my expression. My appearance got an enthusiastic response from everyone, including Mr. Sennett. The clothes seemed to imbue me with the spirit of the character. He actually became a man with a soul, a point of view. I defined to Mr. Sennett the type of person he was. He wears an air of romantic hunger, forever seeking romance, but his feet won't let him.
he became a worldwide figure during the First World War, while the German submarines were sinking convoys of ships. Somehow his films were circulating around the world. It's as if there were special convoys just to take Chaplin films to Europe.
The Great Dictator is a 1940 American political satire comedy drama film written, directed, produced, and scored by Charlie Chaplin, following the tradition of many of his other films. Having been the only Hollywood filmmaker to continue to make silent films well into the period of sound, Chaplin made this his first true sound film. It advanced its stirring condemnation of Adolf Hitler, Benito Mussolini, fascism, anti-Semitism, and the Nazis.
I remember seeing a silent newsreel of Hitler and thinking suddenly, this man looks absolutely ridiculous, and just like Chaplin would look if he were playing such a part.
At the time of its first release, the United States was still formally at peace with Nazi Germany. Chaplin plays both leading roles, a ruthless fascist dictator and a persecuted Jewish barber. The Great Dictator was popular with audiences, becoming Chaplin's most commercially successful film. Modern critics have also praised it as a historically significant film and an important work of satire. In 1997, it was selected by the Library of Congress for preservation in the United States National Film Registry as being culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant. The Great Dictator was nominated for 5 Academy Awards: Outstanding Production, Best Actor, Best Writing for Original Screenplay, Best Supporting Actor, and Best Music Original Score. The Great Dictator was the last film in which the beloved Tramp appeared. Chaplin and Hitler actually had a surprising number of things in common, apart from their similar mustaches. They were born within a week of each other in April 1889. They experienced harsh, impoverished childhoods, and they aspired to be artists. Chaplin escaped poverty by entering the theater, while Hitler strove to find acceptance as a painter, but was rejected by the Vienna Academy. How different history might have been, notes narrator Kenneth Branagh, had he been accepted. Ironies abound. Hitler lived homeless on the streets of Vienna, just like the impoverished tramp Chaplin portrayed in countless films, and eventually found refuge in the Vienna Men's Home, which was supported partly by Jewish charities. Henry Ford, the American motor car manufacturer satirized in Chaplin's Modern Times in 1936, was a virulent anti-Semite who admired Hitler. As Hitler and his Nazi party rose to prominence, Chaplin's popularity throughout the world became greater than ever.
In every country, Chaplin was the symbol for laughter. Hitler, the symbol for destruction. His war cost 55 million lives. But in the 1930s, he seemed unstoppable. World leaders sought to appease him. Most of Hollywood chose to ignore him. But one voice would speak to millions. One man would have the courage to challenge the world's most dangerous leader. Charlie Chaplin.
He was mobbed by fans on a 1931 trip to Berlin, which annoyed the Nazis, who published a book in 1934 titled The Jews Are Looking at You, in which the comedian was described as a disgusting Jewish acrobat. Ivor Montague, a close friend of Chaplin's, relates that he sent Chaplin a copy of the book and always believed this was the genesis of The Great Dictator. In his 1964 autobiography, Chaplin stated that he could not have made the film if he had known about the true extent of horrors of the Nazi concentration camps at that time. Although Adolf Hitler probably never gave Charlie Chaplin a second thought during his rise to power, Chaplin was obsessed with the notion that there was a larger and more profound meaning to the coincidence of his age proximity to Hitler. When The Great Dictator opened in 1940, more than a year before the U.S. entered World War II, many were outraged that a British citizen has used his power as one of the most popular men in the world to create such a devastating depiction of what life was like for Jews under the Nazis. Even today, the film is unique in its power to provoke both hilarity and horror. The film went into production just after the outbreak of war in Europe on September 9, 1939, and like many of Chaplin's later films, it had a slow shoot. In fact, Chaplin changed his original ending, tantalizing glimpses of which appear in the color documentary footage, in response to the fall of France, replacing it with the impassioned speech that climaxes the picture, addressing himself directly to cinema audiences around the world. In contrast to the timid attitude of Hollywood companies of the time, Chaplin's personally financed film pulls few punches in its depiction of the harassment and even murder of Jews, though there was no way at the time Chaplin could have known the full extent of the horrors going on in Europe. Kevin Brownlow, the British film historian who has done as much as anyone to explore the riches of Hollywood's past and who made the masterful documentary The Unknown Chaplin, has achieved, with co-director Michael Cloft, a great deal in a running time of less than an hour. The documentary includes never-before-seen color film shot by Chaplin's brother Sidney during the making of The Great Dictator and recently discovered at the Chaplin Villa in Switzerland. This footage, which looks remarkably rich and beautiful, is integrated into scenes from The Great Dictator and is of immense interest, not least for giving us glimpses of Chaplin the director at work. It also gives us an alternate insight to Chaplin's classic film, which started production years before Adolf Hitler was seen as a major threat in the Western world. Among the many topics covered in the film is Hollywood's frightened reaction to Chaplin's daring move, at a time when appeasing rather than openly opposing Hitler was the order of the day, and Hitler's own reaction upon seeing the completed film himself. Among those interviewed for the documentary are Chaplin's son Sidney, politician-historian Arthur Schlesinger Jr., film directors Bernard Vorhaus and Sidney Lumet, and caricaturist Al Hirschfeld, who served as a publicity artist for The Great Dictator. A group of commentators provide useful insights into the period in which the film was made and contemporary reactions to it. Author Ray Bradbury notes, "Comedy is the greatest way to attack a totalitarian regime. But not everyone at the time thought the Nazis were a fit subject for comedy." Other interviewees include critic Stanley Kaufman and Nikola Radicevic, a Yugoslav who reveals that as a cinema projectionist during the war, he substituted a copy of the film for a German production at a screening for German troops. An SS officer became so enraged that he started shooting at the screen. Yet Reinhard Spitzy, a member of Hitler's inner circle, is certain Hitler himself saw the film more than once, and that he would have liked it because he had a sense of humor. Albert Speer wrote to Una Chaplin many years after the war to tell her, "The Great Dictator was the finest documentary on the Third Reich." Whatever one's personal response to Chaplin's film is, there's no doubt about the passion and even courage that went into the making of it. The Tramp and the Dictator also features interviews with historians, members of both men's inner circle, Chaplin's family members, newsreels, and clips from Chaplin's films and Hitler's propaganda films. The Chaplin family contacted Brownlow after two of the actors' children, Christopher and Vicky, found the color footage of The Great Dictator in a suitcase in the basement of their family home in Switzerland. Chaplin's brother Sidney had shot the footage. Brownlow and his producer Patrick Stanbury went over to Paris to look at the footage. "I felt at once, as fascinating though it wasn't revealing enough to carry a 50-minute documentary," says Brownlow. He didn't think any more about it until his German counterpart Michael Cloft rang him up about the footage. He said, "Why don't we do it as a portrait of Chaplin and Hitler," recalls Brownlow. "That was the clue. Then you could do it." The documentary reveals that Hollywood was afraid in the late 30s to upset the Nazis and was careful to excise anything anti-Third Reich from scripts. Part of the reason for their resistance to make anything critical toward Hitler was the fact that Hollywood didn't want to lose the lucrative German film market. Hollywood exported movies to the country until 1941.
Louis B. Mayer of MGM would actually run those films with the Nazi German consul, and was willing to take out the things that the Nazi objected to.
The problem with Hollywood, which I've often said to my friends, is that we're living in the company of cowards. They won't stand up for anything. They pretend to stand up for it, but when the money is down, they fade out.
More importantly, Brownlow asserts, Hollywood feared repercussions against Jews left in Germany. So when Chaplin decided to make The Great Dictator in 1939, before Hitler invaded Poland, Brownlow says Hollywood was desperate to stop him. Even after Chaplin made the film with his own money, the studio chiefs didn't want it released. Finally, says son Sidney Chaplin, it was President Roosevelt who stepped in. My father didn't like Hitler at all, recalls Chaplin. He thought he was pompous and ridiculous. But we weren't at war. He finally had to get permission to release the picture from President Roosevelt. Roosevelt said, "This man should be ridiculed." Brownlow says that Chaplin actually put his life on the line making the film. The number of political assassinations by Hitler and Stalin at that time was enough to worry someone of his importance, says Brownlow. Trotsky had been assassinated in 1940, and Chaplin might well have been killed in California.
Here was this huge artist standing up against this gargantuan monster.
Though Hitler hated Chaplin, says Brownlow, because the dictator thought he was a Jew, he loved American films and even graded them in his notebooks. Greta Garbo, for example, was one of his favorites. The jury is still out on whether Hitler ever saw The Great Dictator. Co-director Kloft was able to track down a member of Hitler's inner circle, who said it is likely the Führer did screen the film. Nazi propagandist Joseph Goebbels has said in his diaries that Hitler concentrated on newsreels once the war began. But I cannot believe that. The temptation would be too great, Brownlow says.
At the end of the war, I was in Berlin. I was in charge of the gathering the photographic evidence for the war crime trial that was being prepared in Nuremberg. But in the course of it, I looked up the file on what films Hitler had ordered to run. And this is the true. He ordered The Great Dictator, and then he ordered it a day or so after again.
The Great Dictator marked the silent comedian's first foray into talkies. Ironically, Hitler never came across well in silent film. Brownlow says it was only after sound came in and he took acting lessons that he became so powerful and dramatic in front of the cameras. Sidney Chaplin says that since the 1930s he's heard stories that Hitler adapted the little Tramp mustache because his father was so popular. Brownlow disagrees with this theory. If you think about it, Hitler loathed Chaplin because he thought he was a Jew, so why would he adopt the mustache? People said he adopted the mustache to soften his personality and to look like the best-loved man in the world, but he wouldn't want to look like a comedian. It was a style adopted by many military men in Germany at that period. Chaplin has said that if he had known just how insidious Hitler and the Nazi regime were, he never would have made The Great Dictator. I think it made everyone sick when the truth came out, says Brownlow. Comedy was impossible once that had happened. The film, though, helped audiences cope with the horrors of World War II. In England, it was so successful that every cinema in town would be running it, says Brownlow. It was a godsend in England during the Blitz.
Every one of my friends, many of whom were Jewish, like myself, felt that a David had arisen, a comic David, to fight Goliath. And we could only be happy.
The Tramp and the Dictator represented a collaboration between Britain's Photoplay Productions and Germany's Spiegel TV. In America, the film was first broadcast on October 1, 2002, as the vanguard of a TCM cable network retrospective of Hitler-related films and cartoons, beginning with the new, digitally restored version of 1940's The Great Dictator. This documentary reinvigorated my Chaplin interest and opened new dimensions of insight and perspective. I highly suggest watching for yourself. It is included as a bonus feature on the Great Dictator DVD and Blu-ray. I have been obsessed with it for years.
I'm sorry, but I don't want to be an emperor. That's not my business. I don't want to rule or conquer anyone. I should like to help everyone if possible. Jew, Gentile, black man, white. We all want to help one another. Human beings are like that. We want to live by each other's happiness, not by each other's misery. We don't want to hate and despise one another. In this world, there's room for everyone, and the good earth is rich and can provide for everyone. The way of life can be free and beautiful, but we have lost the way. Greed has poisoned men's souls, has barricaded the world with hate, has goose-stepped us into misery and bloodshed. We have developed speed, but we have shut ourselves in. Machinery that gives abundance has left us in want. Our knowledge has made us cynical, our cleverness hard and unkind. We think too much and feel too little. More than machinery, we need humanity. More than cleverness, we need kindness and gentleness. Without these qualities, life will be violent, and all will be lost. The aeroplane and the radio have brought us closer together. The very nature of these inventions cries out for the goodness in men, cries out for universal brotherhood, for the unity of us all. Even now, my voice is reaching millions throughout the world, millions of despairing men, women, and little children, victims of a system that makes men torture and imprison innocent people. To those who can hear me, I say, do not despair. The misery that is now upon us is but the passing of greed, the bitterness of men who fear the way of human progress. The hate of men will pass, and dictators die, and the power they took from the people will return to the people. And so long as men die, liberty will never perish. Soldiers, don't give yourselves to brutes, men who despise you, enslave you, who regiment your lives, tell you what to do, what to think, and what to feel, who drill you, diet you, treat you like cattle, use you as cannon fodder. Don't give yourselves to these unnatural men with machine minds and machine hearts. You are not machines. You are not cattle. You are men. You have the love of humanity in your hearts. You don't hate. Only the unloved hate. The unloved and the unnatural. Soldiers, don't fight for slavery. Fight for liberty. In the 17th chapter of St. Luke it is written, the kingdom of God is within man, not one man nor a group of men, but in all men, in you. You, the people, have the power to create machines, the power to create happiness. You, the people, have the power to make this life free and beautiful, to make this life a wonderful adventure. Then in the name of democracy, let us use that power. Let us all unite. Let us fight for a new world, a decent world, that will give men a chance to work, that will give youth a future and old age a security. By the promise of these things, brutes have risen to power, but they lie. They do not fulfill that promise. They never will. Dictators free themselves, but they enslave the people. Now let us fight to fulfill that promise. Let us fight to free the world, to do away with national barriers, to do away with greed, with hate and intolerance. Let us fight for a world of reason, a world where science and progress will lead to all men's happiness. Soldiers, in the name of democracy, let us all unite!
Thank you for listening to Eclectic Obsessions. If you like what you've heard, please download past episodes and subscribe on iTunes for future releases. You can follow the show on Facebook at Eclectic Obsessions, on Twitter at Eclectic Obsess1, on Instagram at Eclectic Obsessions Podcast, and on YouTube at Eclectic Obsessions. I'd love to hear what you think. Feel free to email the show at ecobpod@gmail.com. We'll be back in 1 month's time with a new Eclectic Obsession.
Super awful.
How different history might have been, notes narrator Kenneth Branagh. How different history might have been, notes Ken. Oh,